Welcome. Thank you for joining me. My name is Amy Bostic. I'm the Human Resource Management Data Services Manager. We'll be talking a little bit today about the I-9 process and giving you some tips and best practices that will help you hopefully with your completion of these forms. Tips for completing the I-9, areas of focus for the employee and department. I want to give you a little bit of background on the I-9 and what it is. This came about in 1986 in an effort to control illegal immigration. Congress passed the Immigration Reform and Control Act. IRCA forbids employers from knowingly hiring individuals who do not have work authorization in the United States. Form I-9 is an employment verification tool brought about by IRCA. Form I-9 also helps verify whether individuals are authorized to work in the United States. Individuals who may legally work in the United States are citizens of the United States, non-citizen nationals of the United States, lawful permanent residents, and aliens who are authorized to work. In order to comply with the employment eligibility verification provisions of the INA, an employer must do the following. Verify the identity and employment authorization documents of employees. This is those that are hired after November 6, 1986, and they must be original documents. You must complete and retain a Form I-9 for each individual hired after November 6, 1986. You must refrain from discriminating against individuals on the basis of actual or perceived national origin, citizenship, or immigration status. Employers who knowingly violate or circumvent the Form I-9 process or anti-discrimination requirements of the INA may be subject to civil and/or criminal penalties. Completing the Form I-9. All U.S. employers must have a Form I-9 on file for all current employees. An exception to this are employers are not required to have Forms I-9 for employees hired on or before November 6, 1986. These are going to be some examples of the form and showing you some of the areas of interest to be aware of when you begin the process of completing the Form I-9. Always be sure you use the most current I-9 form. In order to be sure that you are using the most current form, you can verify this information by looking at the top right corner, and you'll see where it says this form expires 8/31/2019. Never use a form that you may have retained in your documents or files that has expired. HRM will not be allowed to keep that form, and we will be giving it back to you to update with the correct form. The date is also found at the bottom of the form, and it will show the current date for a form that is up to date. We will only accept that most recent I-9. Please remember, all others will be returned to the department to be updated. The most recent copy can be found on the HRM website. If for some reason you have trouble uploading the most recent copy on the HRM website, you can go out to the USCIS website and get the most updated copy there. Areas of focus for Section 1, the employee completes page 1 of the I-9, and the department authorized representative will certify what the employee completes on page 2 of the I-9. All sections must be complete. I cannot emphasize this enough. If there is a blank space on the I-9, there has to be an NA in that spot that's blank, and I'll get more into that in a minute showing you an example. If using electronic format, then the employee can click on the blue question mark for each box and receive tips for completion. Areas to focus on page 1 of the I-9 include missing NAs in areas where no data is provided. Verify the date of birth and social security number and make sure they are correct. And if using ink to complete, make sure all the information is legible. They should only be using blue or black ink, never use pencil, and like I said, be sure you can read it, because if you can't read it at the department level, we're not going to be able to read it in HRM. Here's an example of page 1. Section 1 that the employee completes. If you see, if they have a middle initial, they'll need to put that If they don't have a middle initial, then NA would be put in this spot. Other last names used, if they have a question about that, if they are using the electronic format, they can click on this blue question mark and you'll see this drop-down box appear. And it tells them, enter NA if you have not used other last names. Their address needs to be complete. It does not need to be a post office box. If there's an apartment number, that would go here. If there's no apartment number, NA would also need to be placed here. The same for the employee's email address and the employee's telephone number. Be sure that the Social Security number is legible and correct, and be sure the date of birth is correct. One thing on the date of birth we see quite often is the employee's been signing forms all day long and they'll end up putting the current year instead of their year of birth. So be aware of that, please. As page 1 continues for the employee, they will come across 4 boxes. They'll need to select one of these options in that box: a citizen of the United States, a non-citizen national of the United States, a lawful permanent resident, or an alien authorized to work. As you see in the boxes, a citizen of the United States is just one click. There's no additional information needed. Same for a non-citizen national of the United States. For options 3 and 4, there will also be additional information required if those choices are selected. You can also see from the example that NA is automatically populated if the employee has selected a citizen of the United States. And this is another great option for doing it electronically. Those boxes are populated for you. If you're doing it in ink, the student will need to put NA themselves in those empty spots so that the form will be correct and we will be able to accept it. At the bottom of page 1 that the employee completes, they will also need to sign and date the form with today's date. Be aware in the preparer and or translator certification box, they must select one. Either they did not use a preparer or translator or they did. We see a lot of forms in HRM that we receive where this section has not been completed. Once again, verify today's date, because just like they use the today's year for their date of birth, sometimes they use their date of birth for today's date. So just verify those dates if you would. Once the page 1 is completed by the employee, have the employee print, if they've done it electronically, sign and date it, and submit to the department representative with documentation they have selected from list of acceptable document chart. And I'll show you that chart in just a moment. Verify all the information is complete, correct, and legible if completed in ink. Employees must complete no later than their first business day of employment. Verify the date signed is current and not the employee birth date. Here's the list of acceptable documents. Be aware they can either choose one from list A or they would need to choose one from list B and list C. We don't need anything from list B or C if they've used the correct documents from list A. Over-verifying should not be done. Also, due to the quality when indexing these forms in HRM, please do not send color copies of the documents. Also, send black and white copies only. We do not need color copies. We just need to verify that they are legible and readable. As long as that has been done, then HRM can accept them. Also, another tip, if they do use a document from list C and it's the Social Security card, be sure that the notifications that are in red there are not on the card. If it says not valid for employment, valid for work only with INS authorization, valid for work only with DHS authorization, that's not a valid Social Security card that we can accept as an identifying document from list C. Moving on to page 2 of the I-9, this is where the employer or authorized representative reviews and verifies the documentation that the employee has used on page 1. If you've used the electronic version at this point, the name will automatically populate here and the citizenship immigration status will appear from the box they selected on page 1. If they were a U.S. citizen, the 1 corresponds to that on page 2. If you do this in ink, you would just put the number 1 or the number 2, 3, or 4 based upon their response of the employee on page 1. The list of acceptable documents, once you receive those from the employee, this is where you would enter that information. If they did such an item such as the passport, that would go in list A. If they're using like a driver's license and a social security card, you would put the driver's license in list B and the social security card in list C. Please be sure to follow what the form is asking for and make sure that all the information is there, it's correct and legible. You're not required to be a document expert, but you must accept a document presented by an employee if it reasonably appears to be genuine and relates to the individual presenting it. The document must be the original though. Photocopies are not accepted for verification. The only exception to this is a certified copy of a birth certificate. Make the copies of the documents presented, attach those to the I-9, and forward to HRM for processing by data services. The I-9 form will need to come over with the HRM hiring packet for both new hires and rehires. Once again, please do not send colored copies or enlargements of documents presented. Certification of page 2, once you have finished verifying those documents, you will need to list where the employee's first date of employment will be. The first date of employment on the I-9 must match the date of employment on the EIF. I cannot stress this enough. Those 2 dates must be the same. If the EIF says new hire for 1/9/2019, then the I-9 should say 1/9/2019. Be sure you sign as the authorized representative, put today's date, your title, last name, first name, the employer's business or organization name, the organization's address, and once again, this needs to be a street address. No post office box numbers can be used here. The city or town, the state, and the zip code. One of the great things about using the electronic format is when you get to the bottom of page 2 and you're ready to complete the process, if you hit the click to finish option at the bottom, if something is not completed, it will show up in red, letting you know that you still need to go back and complete those boxes. The instructions for completing a re-verification of the I-9 form. On page 1, section 1, the employee information and attestation only enter the following: their last name, their first name, the middle initial, and the social security number. That's all you have to put on a re-verification in section 1 that the employee needs to put. You then move over to page 2, section 2, employer or authorized representative review and verification, and only enter the following information: the last name, first name, middle initial, and the leave citizenship. This is again up at the top of page 2. If there isn't a middle initial, enter NA, and if you completed section 1 by the computer, this information will populate in this section. You would then move down to section 3 where it says re-verification and rehires. If they had a new name, you would list their new name here. If the last name was the only part of the name that's new, you would just do last name and put NA for first and middle initial. If the name has not changed, then put NA in all 3 of those spots. Date of the rehire, enter NA. The document title is what the employee is presenting to show the work authorization. Usually this will be their new I-20, H-1B, J-1, EAD, PR, or U.S. citizenship, depending on which status they hold. If using the computer, you can use the drop-down box to find this information and select the correct one. Once you do that, you'll need to put the document number of the new document, the expiration date of the new document, the signature of the employer or authorized representative, today's date, and the name of employer or authorized representative. Make a copy of the new document, attach it to the I-9, and send it to HRM for processing. Correcting mistakes. If you discover a mistake on the Form I-9, correct the existing form or prepare a new one. If you choose to correct the existing I-9, line out the incorrect portion, enter the correct information, and initial and date the correction. If it's on page 1 that the employee completes, the employee would need to do this. You cannot make the corrections for the employee. If you do a new Form I-9, retain the old form, and you should also attach a short memo to both the new and old forms stating the reason for your action. The International Employment Site is designed to serve MSU departments in providing additional resources for work authorization in compliance with federal laws and regulations, specifically for H-1B and permanent residency. For more information on this, you can contact your HRM generalist, and there's also more information on the HRM website. I-9 forms that HRM received are e-verified through the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. This just includes some information on the Form I-9 and e-verify, but HRM requires an I-9 form for any new hire or rehire. This concludes my presentation on the I-9s. I appreciate you joining me for this. If you have any questions, you can contact me at the email address provided or Leslie Bolton. Also, our phone number is 325-3713. Thank you.